Hello, I'm Moni Vargas, the Creative and Program Director at Breakthrough, a nonprofit culture change organization that uses media, arts, and tech to promote human rights. Welcome to Breakthrough Spotlight, our weekly video and podcast series featuring conversations with community leaders, activists, artists, and partner organizations working to build a world that is more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable for all. Thanks for joining us.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Breakthrough Spotlight. I'm Zara Chaudhary. I'm a community engagement intern with Breakthrough, with the partnerships team, and I'm so excited to have Raie Gessesse here with us today, the Midwest Programs Manager at Ignite National.
I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you about everything related to civic engagement and how Ignite is getting out the vote. But before we fully dive in, do you want to just tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you first got involved with Ignite?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Raie Gessesse. I am from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am the child of immigrants. My parents immigrated here from Ethiopia just 2 months before giving birth to me. So for me, really, like the beginning of my story was the beginning of theirs as well. So just a little bit of a background on how I came into this work. In my family and in my culture, women are really the pillars of our communities. Women are, leading community groups, doing a lot of the household and external work. And for us, and for me, quite frankly, it's always been inspiring to be around so many women who are just doing it all. So in 2016, I was formally appointed by former Governor Mark Dayton of Minnesota to sit on the first ever Young Women's Initiative cabinet. And what this cabinet's role is to truly build a Minnesota where every single young girl and young woman in Minnesota can thrive. So it's within this role where I was able to be exposed to opportunities in nonprofit and philanthropy, in the private sector and government, and how we can have some cross-sector conversations on how to better the lives of young women in the state of Minnesota. And it was through this role where I realized the significant gaps in women representing in our government. I witnessed so many times having to explain my lived experiences or myself and my community's lived experiences to people who, quite frankly, had absolutely no idea what it was like to grow up as a woman of color in America and as an immigrant woman. So I was, it was kind of right at the point where I was like, we just need new people in office, where I was introduced to Ignite. My good friend, Andrea, was actually the Ignite Fellow from Minnesota, and I've been already attending some of the events that she was hosting. And I was like, I absolutely love the mission of this organization. So, lo and behold, the next year I applied, I eventually got it, and I became the Minnesota Fellow for Ignite. And after this role, I just wrapped up my fellowship in June, and my boss offered me a full-time job. So now I am the Midwest Program Manager for Ignite National, and I'm also the Ignite the Vote Ambassador. And for those who are unfamiliar with Ignite's work, Ignite is a movement of young women who are ready and eager to become the next generation of young women political leaders. We're the largest and most diverse young women's political organization in the country, and we're dedicated to training women in their local communities to run for office. So far, we have 10,000 plus young women all across the country that are doing this, 75% of which are women of color. We're across 30 states. And we know that for us, when we think about what it means to build political power, we do need to change the face of our entire democracy, and young women need to be at the center of that. My very first college council, I had this profound moment where one of my participants came up to me at the end of the event. She was like, before this, I had never thought that I could see myself in office. I only thought that I could be a staffer. For me, that was a moment where I was like, oh my God, like we have been training people to feel like they can only be the background, but they can't be the person in the front. I was struck by this, and I was like, this is why I do my work. Because people like her and young women all across this country deserve to feel like they can be leaders and they can be the drivers in their own lives. They can be in the front seat. They can direct and dictate what comes of their life and how they want to go about that, right? young women deserve to have self-determined lives. This is why I do the work that I do. And this is why when I host my events, I know that if I empower and if I uncover and embolden at least one young woman, I know that it has the potential to create waves of young women that follow her, because she'll talk to her friends and her friends will talk to their friends. And then all of a sudden we have a movement of young women who are living their truths, who are speaking truth to power, and who are taking up space in places of power that have been void of their participation for far too long. Our country is changing. Young women need to be at the front of that change when they have been serving as the pillars of our communities for so long. Imagine the waves of change that'll happen when people feel when people feel grounded in their capabilities and they're confident and they're able to go out and create the change that we all deserve to see, not just for today, but for the generations to come.
It was so exciting for me when I came across the organization as I was doing research for our Get Out the Vote campaign. And so I know a lot of the work that you guys are currently doing is focused on getting out the vote. We know every single election is important, but there's so much happening right now in America. So I guess to start, could you just discuss the urgency of this particular moment and why you think it's so important for people to make sure they cast their ballot?
As an organization, Ignite National, we are building political power. And in order for us to build political power, we also have to build electoral power. And this election is especially important to do so. This is the election that could change the trajectory of our lifetimes and the generations to come. So I know for a lot of young folks, we are not doing this work just for us, but we're building it so we can see a tomorrow, so we can see a future, and so we can have generations to follow after us that don't have to go through the suffering and the pain that we experience today. We're becoming the most educated, but also the most indebted generation in our country's history. We've lived through the epidemic of mass school shootings. We've experienced rising hate crimes, the killings of unarmed Black people, the increasing global threat of climate change. We have actually the greatest economic and wealth inequality that we've ever seen in recorded history. We have an incarceration rate that's the greatest on the entire face of the planet. So for many of us, we have grown up in a life that quite frankly does not resemble any iteration of an American dream, but most closely resembles a nightmare. It's in this context that we're talking about voting and demanding our fair share of political power and electoral power. The thing that I love about Gen Zers and my generation in particular is that we're passionate about a lot of issues because we've seen a lot of issues. And the thing is, we're very keenly aware of the interconnectedness of our issues. As someone who is a Black woman, I'm also deeply committed to the movement of Indigenous people in this country because we are on stolen land and stolen grounds, right? Gen Zers in particular see our issues as interconnected and see our struggles as global and as taking place within community. So all of that is to say that we didn't inherit a lot of the issues that we see today, but we are fully prepared to take them on. And the election is one way to do that. So it's like, despite all of these experiences that have made our generation, Gen Z, the most politically engaged generation that we've seen in over half a century. Like that's absolutely amazing. And it speaks to the depths of how Gen Z has a politics that's really about movement building on the streets, but it's also showing up in faces of power. So yeah, Ignite has pivoted this year to do a lot of electoral work because we saw the necessity to get involved in this work when we constantly hear narratives around young people don't vote, young people don't care. Well, the truth of it is that young people do care and young people are involved, but we're not making it accessible for them to do so.
Gen Z does care a lot about what's happening in this country. And you mentioned accessibility to information as being one of the most significant barriers. And that's for sure a huge issue in this country. What are some of the resources that Ignite has put together to make voting easier, and especially to make accommodations to account for the fact that we're still very much in a pandemic?
Voting is hard, and especially for people who are on the margins of our society, it's even harder. And I also have to address the fact that we have significant voter suppression in this country that makes it even more hard, despite being in the middle of a pandemic, right? So in this day and age, I truly believe that voting is an act of resistance. In the face of a pandemic, a recession, a global racial justice movement, I am very I'm very particular about how I'm going to be using all of the tools that I have at my disposal to make sure that I'm able to bring about the revolutionary change that we need. So one of those is obviously my electoral voting power. So acknowledging that voting is hard, we've developed Sophia, the voting chatbot that talks you through the process of getting your ballot and then making sure that you can cast your ballot. Sophia will ask you a series of questions that'll help you figure out where to register and then send you your state-specific plan that easily gets you whatever forms you need, whether it's an absentee ballot form or whether it's a voter registration form, to successfully submit them online. All you have to do is text IGNITE to 33777 and give it your contact information and where you think you'll be registering to vote, and boom, Sophia will send you a personalized voting plan for the 2020 presidential elections. My favorite part about Sophia is that besides making voting fun and easy, Sophia will send you personalized reminders of your state-specific deadlines all the way up until election day so that you can make sure to cast your ballot. Part of our theory here is that we can't always talk about why young people don't vote if we don't also talk about the reasons why it's hard to vote in this country. So we're making voting accessible, we're making voting fun, and we're going to turn out the vote this year so young women can determine the election this year.
Even though turnout is notoriously low among young people, we know that Gen Z and millennials do care about the issues. Ignite in particular did some research about young voters. I think you guys came up with some pretty interesting findings about the issues that Gen Z prioritizes. If you want to talk about that a little bit with us.
We conducted 2 surveys. The first one was in June 2019. We conducted a national random survey of 2,250 Gen Zers. And then in May 2020, we conducted a new national random sample following the pandemic with a random sample of 1,049 Gen Zers. And our results were very interesting. So among the results, we found that Democratic Party identification among Gen Z women, so people who identified as women, has grown in the past year. And secondly, we also saw that since last year, Gen Z women are drastically more likely to support Biden over Trump. One of the questions that we asked is, why don't young people vote? And the responses that we got is, one, lack of knowledge. So students feel like voting is a test. They feel that because they haven't been equipped on what it means to participate in our elections, they feel that voting is a test that they will fail and they'll rather not engage with it at all. The second one is that some young people have a hard time connecting traditional political participation with the governance that affects their everyday lives. So for some young people, they would much rather go out to a protest or do a town hall or talk in student organizations than they would get out to vote. And then the third one is practical issues. So students are having a hard time, getting transportation to get out to vote, or having a hard time identifying the forms that they need, or understanding the polling locations and what kind of voter ID requirements that their state has, plus so much more. This is why our Ignite the Vote initiative addresses all reasons of why young people are having a hard time voting. We are really blending the power of influencers, technology, and on-the-ground ambassadors to revolutionize what it means to be engaged in the electoral process this time around, because we know that at Ignite, it can't just be voting and that's it, but it's really about voting and building political power, building electoral power, and building people power. So we have influencers that are leading conversations with their followers. We have people who are ambassadors that are leading communal conversations. And then we have technology that's making all of this a lot easier and really transforming what it means to be an organized, group of people in this generation.
You mentioned earlier that Ignite is focusing on elections at the moment, but really one of the core missions of the organization is building people power and building women's leadership. So I was wondering if you could talk about some of your ongoing initiatives, especially in schools and within the network of young girls that you know as the Midwest Programs Manager.
Well, our theory of change really at Ignite is that we have to build political power that is able to sustain us in the long term. So like I said, we have pivoted to building our electoral power. That's why we've pivoted into voting. But we can't forget that the goal here is building political power. So when we do this, we have an initiative called Declaring Your Ambition. So declare your ambition, your desire to run for office and to represent your community. Why? Because these are the seats that end up having decisions over our lives. And you have to stop waiting. You don't need to be so qualified to run for office. What I'm really dedicated to doing is training young women to leverage their personal experiences as the essence of their political platforms. I think we've seen enough of, the traditional people who have been in office and, made decisions that are, falling short now. And I think we're seeing the remnants of that. So what I say, the number one thing that I say is that we need to stop waiting. And the second one is that when we say that we are training young women to run for office, we are saying all 500,000 seats that are available in office in our country. It is not just Congress and the presidency. Although those are important, we're also worried about our local boards and commissions. We're also worried about local city council elections and seats. What about mayors? There are so many other ways that young women can get involved on the local level that we often forget. So we have 500,000 seats in this country, and we are dedicated to making sure that young women, especially women of color, have those seats. 75% of Ignite's participants are women of color. That's not a surprise. It's women of color that have often led the movements, and just imagining the transformation that our country can have if we believe young women, if we invest in young women, we support and elevate young women. Gen Z is the most diverse generation that our country has ever seen. We're nearly 50% non-white, and it's only going to grow with the coming generations. We're becoming a voting bloc and a people that we can no longer be ignored in this moment. So for us, it's about how can we organize our demands and our policy proposals and our power so that when we get to tables to negotiate, we're not having to sacrifice some of the values and some of the beliefs that we have for a just world, but really they're going to have to negotiate with us. I'm not quite sure if I mentioned this already, but Gen Z and Millennials make up 37% of the electorate together. And that's obviously still growing. And with the way that Gen Zers have been organizing recently, following generations, younger generations are only going to take the lead that Gen Z has already spearheaded. So our country is rapidly changing, and it's time that our elected officials and our elected leadership did the same.
I was just wondering, what are some qualities that you really admire in leadership?
I think one of the values that I really value is honesty and truth-telling. There is so much power when we're able to speak truth to power, right? So when we are able to acknowledge the harms of the past and we're able to devise a future that is void of the oppression and void of the suffering of today, is I think where true power lies. And I think when leaders are able to be visionaries, which is another one of the values that I have. So, you're able to imagine a future where you're able to imagine a future that is much brighter than the one that we're currently in. I think having the foresight and the vision to do that is extremely powerful. And one of the things that I look for in a leader. And then also one of the last things that I really look for, a value and a commitment to justice. Justice work isn't easy. Justice work, it's never meant to be easy, but it is meant to be right. And justice work is right. We need more leaders who are unwavering in their commitment to justice, especially in a world where people seem to engage in things for self gain or self profit. And we need to kind of pivot into a world that sees us as a part of a collective and start investing in the collective power that we have.
In Ignite's research, some of the reasons that young people don't vote is because they feel it's not the best way to get the kind of results and change that they wish to see. And so some of them might instead attend a protest or go to a town hall. But could you respond to that cynicism for us a little bit and tell us why you think electoral politics is part of the process, and also what we should do after an election cycle to continue progress?
One of my favorite quotes by Stacey Abrams on this is that voting has never saved us from harm, but silence will surely damn us all. And it's a very honest way of putting what voting has actually meant in this country. I come at this from a place of I believe in resistance on all levels, at all times, in all places. So if that means at the ballot box, I will be voting, especially when it's in the face of such organized suppression of voters, especially in this day and age. I mean, we have people in our highest levels of government that are tweeting to postpone our elections, our democratic elections, when there are tested ways that we can conduct an election, even being in a pandemic, through vote by mail ballots or socially distanced polling place locations. So I think part of building our political power, like I mentioned, has to be building our electoral power. And when we have electoral power, we no longer have to, like I said before, sacrifice our values or have to negotiate our basic requirements, but the tables will be flipped, actually, and we get to direct the tables. And since we are the growing majority of the electorate, we get to decide over the policies and the laws that are going to govern our lives. I completely hear folks who say that they've lost faith in electoral politics, but I'll always say that I err on the side of not relinquishing any type of power that I have, especially when my ability to vote is a privilege that has been fought and won and is continuously being won. So we can't forget that voter suppression happens today. There are people that want to vote that cannot vote. So for me, I'm voting for the folks that don't get the opportunity to vote. I'm going to make my voice heard because there are people that can't have their voices heard. And I'm going to be organizing in my community. So it doesn't start and end with voting. And I hear folks on that, and I completely agree. And that's why I do this work, is because I know that our liberation will not be at the ballot box. Our liberation will be with voting and organizing and strategizing and doing the town halls and running for office and changing the entire face of our democracy. So there is power in engaging in using your right to vote, but there also is power in other ways. So I think voting is just one part of a much larger constellation of social change, of revolutionary change in this country.
That was such a powerful answer to that question, and I think such a beautiful way to wrap up our conversation. Thank you for all of this quality information that you've presented about voting and gaining resources, and I hope people will visit Ignite's website and take a look at the Sophia bot themselves. And also, I hope that you guys will tune in to future episodes of Breakthrough Spotlight. Thanks so much.